If a single slice of pie could expose an entire web of deception, would you dare to take a bite? One early autumn morning, Jackson Rivers stepped into the Lakehurst branch of Eden Crust Bakery wearing a worn khaki coat, a slightly wrinkled collar, and dark shoes whose soles had long been worn thin. No one recognized the middle-aged man as the founder of a beloved bakery chain spanning 17 states. No name tag, no assistant by his side, not a single sign to indicate that this was the CEO behind a brand once hailed as the taste of sincerity. He chose to sit by an old window where the morning light filtered through floral curtains, casting a gentle glow onto the faded, round wooden table, the exact spot where, 30 years ago, his mother used to sit for hours, scribbling down precise measurements for her signature apple pie recipe. When the young server brought the plate and muttered a disinterested number 14 without even looking at him, Jackson merely nodded, his heart sinking. He quietly studied the slice of pie in front of him, the golden crust, a light dusting of sugar across the lattice top, a faint scent of cinnamon. But something felt off. He slid a knife through the slice, and the filling spilled out like gelatin, thick and glossy in an unnatural way. There were no slices of apple, just a gooey mass with a sharp chemical aroma that stung his nose. He picked up a spoon and tasted a small bite. The cloying sweetness overwhelmed his palate, leaving behind a faint metallic aftertaste, completely alien to the warm, mellow flavor of slow-simmered apples he had grown up with. But what jolted him more was the whisper behind him. A little girl, no more than 7, softly told her grandmother, "Grandma, the pie tastes weird. It smells funny." Jackson tightened his grip on the fork, then set it down gently. No need for confrontation, no need to raise his voice. He simply pulled out his phone, took a photo of the slice, and panned the camera down to the faint label beneath the tray. Apple filling, Darren Supplies. The italics were subtle, but what caught his eye was the font itself. It was the proprietary typeface used exclusively by the chain's official supplier system. That meant this wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate substitution, carefully orchestrated to bypass internal checks. In that moment, pieces began to fall into place. The promise he once made to his mother never to let anyone compromise the original flavor, the lingering suspicion when this branch reported unusually high profits despite reduced ingredient orders, and now the fake apple filling sitting right before him. Everything collided at once. No one in the bakery noticed the man leaning close to the table, eyes locked on the faint, italicized text with a piercing stare. But for Jackson Rivers, that moment was the first crack in a wall of deception waiting to collapse. And he knew, starting with this very slice of pie, the truth had begun to leak out. As he left Eden Crust Bakery, Jackson walked slowly along the narrow street of Lakehurst, where weathered shop signs swayed in the chill of autumn wind and storefront windows reflected the sparse movement of early morning passers-by. He stopped beside a utility pole across from the bakery, pulled out his phone, and typed a brief message. "Clara, urgent, check Darren Supplies. Cross-reference all supplier records. Lot code L03821. Sent." A minute later, the typing bubbles appeared. Then came the reply, short but sharp as a hammer to the mind. "Not in the system. No contract. Website created 6 months ago. IP registered in Arizona. Legal rep, Darren Kessler." In that instant, Jackson felt the ground beneath his feet lift in a wave of cold. Darren Kessler, a name that was all too familiar. Brother of Monica Kessler, the manager of the Lakehurst branch for the past 7 years. The one he had once praised as the gold standard in training and operations, the one who had stood on stage beside him, receiving an award for preserving the brand's spirit at one of its oldest locations. At the time, Monica didn't have the authority to change suppliers, at least not on paper. But now, the truth was beginning to surface. She had quietly replaced the original ingredient source with products from her brother's company, establishing a covert supply channel hidden under the guise of a temporary fix. Jackson squinted, trying to stay composed as he scanned back through the details. Labels printed in the company's internal font, a lot code that didn't match any record, a filling so off that even a child could taste the difference. This wasn't an oversight, it was a plan, a calculated switch masked as convenience. He stood silently amid the slowly awakening street, but inside his mind, a storm was raging. The last time he had heard Darren's name was 3 years ago in a meeting, when Monica had proposed changing suppliers to reduce shipping costs, a suggestion Jackson had rejected in order to uphold the long-standing partnership with two traditional farms in Vermont and Idaho. And now, that name had resurfaced, not in a report, but beneath the tray of an apple pie. Jackson needed no more data. That pie slice from this morning wasn't just a disappointing dessert. It was a warning shot, a ticket into a maze of deception. And the people behind it had no idea that the CEO himself was already standing at the heart of that maze. Just 17 minutes after leaving the bakery, Jackson Rivers returned. No coat, no phone, no camera crew. This time, he wasn't there for another slice of pie, but to confront the person who had bent the moral foundation of Eden Crust. He sat at the same table, ordered a cup of black tea, and waited. The light from the window cast a glow on his cheekbones, making his eyes appear tired, but every movement he made carried a quiet, unwavering resolve. Around 11:37 a.m., the door to the manager's office swung open. Monica Kessler stepped out, her ash-blonde hair neatly tied back, her plum-colored uniform jacket pressed to perfection, the Eden Crust logo embroidered prominently on her chest. Her face was set in the default expression of customer service. Smiling, warm, confident. But when her eyes landed on the pie plate and the torn product label Jackson held loosely on the table, her smile faltered. "Is there something I can help you with?" she asked calmly, though her breath caught slightly. Jackson didn't answer right away. He simply placed the label gently on the table and slid it toward her. "I want to ask about this filling, and about a supplier called Darren's Supplies." Monica took a half-step back, just enough for Jackson to catch a flicker of panic in her eyes, masked quickly but not completely. "It was just a temporary substitute. We had issues with the regular supplier's shipment." Jackson looked directly at her, his voice carrying a chill for the first time. "There's no report, no system update, no approval, and the company is registered under your brother's name." Monica said nothing. Her silence contained the answer. Jackson calmly pulled out his wallet, removed a small metal card, and placed it on the table. The Eden Crust logo gleamed in the sunlight, and the embossed text was clear. Jackson Rivers, founder and CEO. Monica froze. Her complexion turned pale, her gaze stuck in the space between the business card and the product label, where all her carefully crafted illusions had just been stripped away by a single question. But Jackson didn't raise his voice, didn't accuse. He simply lowered his tone as if recalling a distant memory. "I didn't come here to eat pie, I came looking for the truth. And today's slice, Monica, is just the first in a pie that's been swapped piece by piece, and one you'll need to explain." No one in the bakery knew they had just witnessed the first confrontation between a founder and someone once regarded as the right hand of the entire system. But Monica understood clearly. That moment marked the beginning of the end she had quietly sown for months. The next morning, Jackson Rivers appeared at the delivery entrance behind the Lakehurst Bakery, wearing the official internal audit uniform of Eden Crust, a light blue shirt, a name badge reading Harrison Bloom, QA Division, square-rimmed glasses, and a clipboard in one hand with an encrypted USB in the other. No one recognized him, not even Monica, who walked past him in the hallway without so much as a glance. Today's objective was clear. He wasn't searching for flavor-based clues anymore. He was after systemic evidence. A young employee named Noah was assigned to assist him. "We keep physical files here, but most things are digitized now," Noah said as he unlocked the side archive room, where 2 rows of old filing cabinets stood beside a dusty office computer running an outdated inventory software. Jackson sat down, pretending to review individual entries, but his eyes scanned the folder tree quickly. Then he paused. A strangely titled file, Vendor Tree, Local Support Initiative. An innocent-sounding name, yet oddly long and out of format. He clicked. The file opened to reveal a detailed transaction list with Darren supplies stretching back over 4 months. Every order was marked internal only, with no reports sent to headquarters and no accompanying documentation. All of it hidden beneath the surface of a system still believed to be reliable. He copied the entire data set onto his USB. Without a flicker of emotion, he nodded to Noah and said, "I need to inspect the cold storage." Noah hesitated. Usually Manager Monica unlocks it herself, but I have a key. The cold storage door opened with a silent gust of chilled air. Jackson instantly sensed something was off. Several cardboard boxes bore no standard labels, only rough markings in black marker, LO3821, LO3824, the same codes he had seen beneath the pie plate. One box was dented, with residue leaking from both sides. Jackson opened it. Inside was a dense, brownish apple filling, its thick texture and sharp industrial odor unmistakable. There was no expiration date, no paperwork, no ingredient label, just a mass of anonymous chemicals delivered straight into customers' stomachs under the trusted name of traditional apple pie. Jackson stood motionless, not because of the cold, but because the fury within him had frozen solid into something dense and immovable. This was no longer a single branch's mistake. It was a hidden operating network, a counterfeit supply system functioning right beneath the glossy veneer of tradition he had spent his entire youth building, and now he had found the first door into that darkness. That afternoon, Jackson sat in the cramped employee break room nestled between the main kitchen and the office wing. The clipboard remained on his lap, but his eyes had drifted far from the standard questionnaire. He no longer cared about scores, procedures, or routine checklists. What he was looking for now was something that never appeared on forms, the truth buried beneath rehearsed language. He requested one-on-one internal check-in sessions with each staff member, a practice typical in quality evaluations. One by one, employees entered and sat across from him. Their answers were nearly identical. "We really love working here. The ingredients are always top quality. Manager Monica is excellent." Polished lines, as if printed in advance. No one seemed nervous. No one slipped. Until Sophie Tran walked in, a young woman with neatly tied black hair, flowers still dusted on her uniform, and an old backpack slung unevenly over one shoulder as if ready to leave at any moment. She sat with her shoulders slightly hunched, eyes downcast. "I just transferred here from another branch 3 weeks ago," she said softly when asked about her training. "It's really different from where I was." Jackson tilted his head slightly, his voice lowering. "Different how?" Sophie glanced around, then dropped her voice as if afraid someone might overhear. "We were told to sign an internal agreement, kind of like an NDA. We're not allowed to say anything about the ingredients, not allowed to post food photos, not allowed to mention suppliers, not even to family." A pause, then she whispered, "Carlos, the assistant manager, once asked about the filling. 2 days later, his hours were cut to 4 per week. Then he just disappeared." Jackson set his pen down. Jackson set his pen. Each heartbeat pounded like a warning bell in his chest. His final question, "If you thought there was a problem with quality, who would you tell?" Sophie hesitated, then answered in a hush. "Monica said, everything must stay internal. That's how we maintain a sustainable culture." Jackson gently closed the file. His gaze no longer rested on Sophie, but seemed to pierce through the thick walls of a system built on fear. He didn't see a timid girl searching for part-time work. He saw an entire generation of young staff raised in a false discipline crafted by master manipulators. They weren't silent out of indifference. They were silent because no one had ever listened. Until now. And Jackson knew. It was from that small fear that he had uncovered the thread to a much deeper chain hidden beneath the crisp crust of a pie. On Thursday morning, while fog still draped over the rooftops of Lakehurst's historic homes, Jackson Rivers was already at the rear parking lot of the bakery. The pale streetlights hadn't yet shut off, and the sun remained hidden behind the line of poplars. He leaned against the damp brick wall near the ice machine, eyes quietly tracing the subtle movements of the waking scene. Today wasn't a scheduled delivery day. But from what Sophie had told him, a truck not listed in the system would be arriving early, during that silent window when staff were still arranging pastry trays and no one dared to ask too many questions. At 6:31 a.m., a white truck with no logo slid into the back lot, its lights off and license plate deliberately dusted over. The cabin door opened and a man in a gray hoodie and black gloves stepped out, saying nothing as he silently stacked boxes onto a cart. He didn't use the main entrance but headed straight for the side door that led into the kitchen, the direct path to the cold storage room. Monica Kessler appeared seconds later. She didn't greet him, didn't inspect anything, only nodded and moved to unlock the cold room door the moment the cart disappeared down the narrow hallway. Employees walking by averted their eyes. No one asked questions. Jackson stepped out of the shadows, his voice cutting through the thick air, firm and clear. "I need to see the delivery invoice." Monica froze, her eyes widening for a split second before returning to composure. "Everything has been updated in the system," she replied calmly. "I want a printed copy," Jackson said, his voice low but heavy, like a hammer striking a marble table. Monica looked him in the eye, her gaze now cold and resolute. "That won't be necessary. We've followed proper procedure." Jackson was silent for a few seconds, then slowly reached into his coat and pulled out the familiar metal card, placing it on the stainless steel counter nearby. The Eden Crust logo shimmered beneath the kitchen lights, beside the name that silenced every employee in sight. Jackson Rivers, founder and CEO. The air seemed to vanish from the room. Monica stood motionless, her breath growing heavier. Her hand gripped the edge of her apron, but she didn't run. "If you want to talk," she said, her voice catching slightly, "we should go to the break room." Jackson gave a slight nod. There was no need to pretend anymore. The real conversation, between the founder and the betrayer, was about to begin, and the door holding back months of buried lies was finally ready to be forced open, to reveal who had helped keep it shut for the last 4 months. 3 months after its closure, the warm light once again filled the space of the Eden Crust Bakery in Lakehurst. The scent of rising dough, melting butter, and real cinnamon blended into the air as if no silence had ever fallen over the place. But this time, everything was different. The storeroom door was no longer locked. There were no more shady pathways for unmarked deliveries. The glass panels in front of the kitchen had been replaced with clear panes, allowing customers to see directly into where each pie was made. On the polished, stainless steel shelves, every container of ingredients now bore a bright red QR code. One scan revealed the farm, the harvest date, the supplier, and the safety certification. There was no longer room for ambiguity. Jackson Rivers stood quietly in the corner of the kitchen, arms folded, his gaze not focused on the newly rising sales charts but on the faces moving around him. There was no hesitation, no lowered eyes. What he saw was life, laughter, and trust being restored. Beside him, Dion, once a line cook, now the operations manager, wore a chestnut polo shirt and spoke enthusiastically. "Revenue is up 32% compared to pre-closure. The loyalty program brought back over 80% of our regulars." Jackson simply nodded. He didn't need the numbers. The real proof lay in the eyes of this rebuilt team. At the front counter, a group of elementary school children was being guided through the kitchen. Leading the tour was none other than Sophie Tran, the same girl who had once sat nervously in the break room, afraid of losing her hours. Now she wore a new name tag, Sophie Tran, assistant manager. She smiled and pointed to the labeled ingredient bins. "This is natural starch, different from artificial thickeners. You know, when we use real ingredients, the pie tastes more honest, softer, and the flavor lingers longer." A little boy raised his hand. "Why is this bakery so famous?" Sophie paused for half a second, then smiled. But it was Jackson who answered, "Because we don't just bake pies, we bake with truth." He lifted a fresh slice from the oven, the light catching the golden lattice crust, releasing the scent of real apples laced with cinnamon and melted butter. Near the door, an elderly man with silver hair and trembling hands held up a fork, tears welling as he took a bite. "This is it. It really is. I thought my memory was betraying me." Jackson looked at him, then turned to his team. In their eyes, there was no more doubt. Because now, Eden Crust had nothing left to hide. Not because it was perfect, but because transparency had returned. And more than anything, the promise to his mother, never replace honesty, had been upheld, not by grand gestures, but by the hands of those once nearly silenced by fear. Late that afternoon, Jackson Rivers stood leaning against the front doorway of Eden Crust, his eyes following the golden hue of sunset casting light on the freshly painted sign, Eden Crust, baked with truth. In his hand was a tablet. Clara Monroe had just sent over the final report from the legal department. The first line appeared, "Investigation conclusion." He quietly read on. Monica Kessler, sentenced to 6 years in prison for commercial fraud and food safety violations. Darren Kessler, 8 years for co-organizing an illegal supply chain and laundering money through a shadow distribution network. Leo Stanton, a former assistant who had been previously terminated, turned out to be the one who copied Jackson's signature from a commemorative document to forge fake contracts. Other involved managers received sentences ranging from 2 to 5 years. The court also ordered all individuals to return their illicit profits in full. Jackson closed the tablet, not out of satisfaction but relief. He had never craved punishment. What he needed was for the truth to be restored to its rightful place, for customer trust to no longer be sacrificed at the altar of greed. But at that moment, something struck him more deeply than any court ruling ever could. An elderly man walked slowly into the bakery, hands trembling as he took a bite of apple pie with his fork. He took a long breath, then looked toward the counter where Sophie stood smiling and bowing and whispered, "I knew it. I wasn't wrong. I used to stop coming here because the flavor had changed. Today, I came back just to test my memory." He had been right. The original taste was never a figment of imagination. It had been stolen, and now it was found again. After the bakery closed, Jackson gathered the remaining team in the main kitchen, from Dion and Sophie to the newly hired recruits from the restructured staff. No one spoke. They simply formed a quiet circle around him. He began, slow but steady. 6 months ago, this bakery stood on the edge, not because of a lack of customers, but because someone forgot why we exist. He reached out and gently pulled back a velvet cloth draped over a section of the stainless steel wall. Underneath was a gleaming brass plaque. Etched into it were the words, "The one ingredient that must never be replaced is honesty." Applause rang out. Not loud, but strong enough to thaw the stone that had long frozen trust in their hearts. Jackson looked at each person, nodding to every pair of eyes. As cleanup wrapped up, he approached Sophie, now double-checking the schedule for next week's school tour. "What did you learn today?" he asked, voice soft as dusk. Sophie looked at him, her eyes shining with a confidence she had never shown before. "That we're not just baking pies, we're keeping a promise." Jackson didn't reply. He simply stepped outside, gazing at the sign glowing against the misty night. In business, there are numbers that never show up on any report: trust, memory, and kindness. He knew profits can be fabricated, misconduct can be hidden, but honesty cannot. And when the truth is brought into the light, only those who have kept their conscience intact can rebuild from the ashes. It all began with a single slice of pie and a promise never to betray it again. That weekend, Eden Crust's Lakehurst branch was preparing for a large pie order from a local high school. The scent of rising dough, ripe apples, and cinnamon drifted through the bright kitchen, mingling with the lively sounds of trays being pulled from the oven. But woven into that comforting aroma was something else entirely, a feeling of transparency, of trust that had returned from the depths of doubt. Jackson Rivers stood beside the familiar stainless steel wall where the new brass plaque still gleamed. The one ingredient that must never be replaced is honesty. He said nothing, simply watched in silence, his eyes sweeping over the staff as they worked, every movement natural, every glance filled with awareness and pride. In one corner of the kitchen, Sophie was showing 2 new hires how to scan the QR codes on ingredient boxes, as if lies had never once had a foothold here. That afternoon, Clara Monroe sent one final update to his tablet. The subject line was simple: case closed. But when Jackson reached the final lines, he stopped reading. Sentences had been handed down, those involved had been prosecuted, and restitution had been paid into the System Recovery Fund. But what made him fall silent wasn't the legal outcome, it was the last line of the report. Lab results from the Institute of Food Safety confirmed that filling from Darren's supplies contains industrial thickener E4735, which, with prolonged use, may lead to severe liver damage. Jackson closed his eyes. The image of that little girl, the one who wrinkled her nose at the pie's strange smell, came back as vividly as if it had happened moments ago. No one had been poisoned. But if this had gone on one more winter, one more year, how many families would have believed they were bringing home a piece of memory, only to serve their children a cheap chemical hidden in a golden crust? He turned back toward the kitchen and slipped the apron over his head. Not to work, but to show that whether you are the CEO, the founder, or simply the one mixing the dough, no one stands outside the boundaries of responsibility. Before closing time, the Eden Crust team gathered in their usual circle. There was no formal speech, just a warm apple pie placed in the center. Jackson cut it into 8 slices, handing one to each person: Dion, Sophie, the 2 new hires, the bakers, the servers, and finally himself. "This was my mother's pie," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "She used to tell me that if you use real ingredients and keep your heart straight, people will taste that from the very first bite." No one replied, but all took a bite, and in that moment, no promises were needed, because the promise was already there, in the apple's warmth, the scent of cinnamon, and the gentle sweetness of real butter, something no one could ever fake. And just like trust, once it returns to where it belongs, it settles quietly and stays forever. In the food industry, where everything can be wrapped in flavor, trust is the one ingredient that cannot be diluted. You can substitute sugar with chemicals, disguise wrongdoing behind attractive packaging, but once honesty is compromised, the aftertaste will always be bitter. Jackson Rivers' story is not just an internal investigation. It is a reminder to every leader that whether you stand behind a kitchen door or at a boardroom table, the truth will always find its way back. If you believe that honesty cannot be faked, like this video, subscribe so you don't miss the next stories, and leave a comment with 3 simple words: cannot be faked.